we see ourselves as a biotech company. We engineer hemp as an additive to plastic today, and in the future, we see that market expanding as we scale out. But we wanted somewhere simple to start where we could provide a radical value.
That's Tim Almond from Heartland Industries in Detroit, Michigan. This is the Lancaster Farming Industrial Hemp Podcast. My name is Eric Herlock. And oh boy, we've got a show for you today. There's a lot going on. So we're going to talk to Tim Almond from Heartland Industries. They've got a program called Hemp4Soil that was recently awarded grant money from the USDA, something like $360,000 to learn about regenerative ag and soil health. And so we're going to talk to Tim about that and how that ties into their main business of supplying hemp as a raw material for the plastic industries. So fascinating conversation with Tim. We're also going to talk to a guy by the name of James Gaspard. He's from Biochar Now in Colorado. I'm going to find out what biochar is, how it's made, how it's used, and more. But wait, that's not all. We're also going to talk to Aaron DeLong. He's a local farmer here in my neighborhood, and he's just received a fellowship to study local supply chains and local food systems. So we're going to talk to him and find out what that's all about. So it's a big show, a lot to cover. We'll have a little bit of a sponsor break here in a second, and then come back with some news, and then we'll get into our show. So here we go. So before we get into anything else, let me just first acknowledge what's happening in the world today. And today is February 24th, 2022. And here in Pennsylvania, I woke up to the news that Ukraine is under full-scale attack from Russia. This is such disturbing news, and I'm having trouble focusing on, other things right now because the implications here are huge, from just a global perspective. This is the last thing we need. But here we are. So I am praying for peace. My heart goes out to the people of Ukraine, and this is, we're obviously going to keep an eye on this and see what happens. But these are strange and historic times that we are living in. Whew. I used to think that history was stuff that happened a long time ago, that you learned about in school, but no. We are living history now, here in the 21st century. So Ukraine has a long and rich history of hemp production and agriculture in general. It was considered the breadbasket of the old USSR. And, in these modern times, there's lots of hemp stuff coming out of Ukraine, from genetics and processing technology, farming techniques. And, they've been doing this a long time. But it really comes down to the people of Ukraine. I've met a handful of folks here in the U.S. hemp space with ties to Ukraine. And this week, I've been trying to schedule an interview with someone I know who's a Ukrainian American who's involved in the U.S. hemp space, and he's in the capital city of Kyiv now, which is under attack. And so our interview was scheduled for this morning, but obviously he's got a lot of bigger things to be dealing with. So, again, my heart goes out to the people of Ukraine, and I am praying for peace, and we'll keep an eye on this. So it's kind of, I feel just sort of ridiculous switching gears to some hemp news. But that's what we're here for, right? We're just going to stay focused on the job at hand. And Anyway. All right. So regular listeners of our show know that our show is sponsored in part by IND Hemp in Montana. And through that sponsorship, I've gotten to know the founder and president of IND Hemp, Ken Elliott. And, we have semi-regular phone calls where we talk about the industry and we talk about, sort of opportunities. And he's an environmentalist, and that's why he's doing what he's doing with IND Hemp. And so it was actually his idea that the sponsorship this year talks less about IND Hemp and more about environmental concerns. So in one of our recent conversations, we were talking about this USDA plan to invest $1 billion in climate smart commodities. So I thought we'd dig into this a little more. I did mention this a couple of weeks ago in the news nuggets. I played a clip of USDA Secretary Vilsack where he mentioned hemp and this speech where he announced this $1 billion in climate-smart commodities. $1 billion, think about that. So the program is called Partnerships for Climate-Smart Commodities, and it will finance pilot projects that create market opportunities for agricultural and forestry products that use climate-smart practices and include innovative, cost-effective ways to measure and verify greenhouse gas benefits. And so the USDA is now accepting project applications for fiscal year 2022. And so they define a climate-smart commodity as an agricultural commodity that is produced using agricultural practices, that's farming, ranching, or forestry, practices that reduce greenhouse gas emissions or sequester carbon. Funding will be provided to partners through USDA's Commodity Credit Corporation for pilot projects to provide incentives to producers and landowners to 1. Implement climate-smart production practices, activities, and systems on working lands, to measure or quantify, monitor, and verify the carbon and greenhouse gas benefits associated with those practices, and to develop markets and promote the resulting climate-smart commodities. And these opportunities are available to sort of a wide range of entities, from state and local governments to tribal governments, businesses, small businesses, nonprofits, institutes of higher learning, all kinds of folks can apply for this and hopefully receive some funding for your climate smart practices and ideas. So yeah, $1 billion. That's a lot of money. And we've got a lot of people out there with good ideas who know, and it really comes down to this. Agriculture has to be part of the climate mitigation solution, right? In the interview a couple of weeks ago with Ben Dobson, he called agriculture the sort of membrane between the atmosphere and the soil, and as stewards of the earth, we have the capacity there to facilitate greater carbon sequestration through our farming practices. And to me, it's just absolutely inspiring that there's so many great, smart people thinking about this. I mean, to be honest with you, we should have been doing this 50 years ago, but here we are. So anyway, something to think about. I will put a link to this $1 billion program on the show page for this episode, so check that out. And I would encourage all of you to apply. You've got great ideas. Let's get some funding. Let's get this thing moving. So there you go. Something to think about from I&D Hemp. All right, so where are we here? I just have one other news nugget, and maybe you've heard this news. It's coming out of New York State, and it's pretty exciting, I guess, for the hemp industry, for hemp farmers. So check this out. So this is a story from the Associated Press. The headline reads, "New York will let hemp farmers grow pot to prepare for legal sales." And the story says that New York is paving the way for hemp farmers to get a head start on growing marijuana for legal sales that are expected to begin next year. Governor Kathy Hochul signed legislation Tuesday that lets hemp cultivators apply for 2-year licenses to grow for the forthcoming legal recreational market for pot. Like hemp, it's a type of cannabis plant. Licensees can start planting marijuana this spring. And then former guest of our show, Alan Gandelman, he's a hemp grower and the president of the New York Cannabis Growers and Processors Association. He says it's a tremendous opportunity. The state is really standing behind the goal of putting New York's existing small businesses first. So for the state, the story says, it's a way to start gearing up supply and showing progress toward launching what's expected to become one of the United States' biggest legal marijuana markets. While New York legalized recreational use of marijuana for adults nearly a year ago, officials are still working on regulations for growing and selling it. The measure will jumpstart the safe, equitable, and inclusive new industry we're building, says the governor. The legislation includes environmental standards and requires licensees to provide training for people of color, women, disabled veterans, and others the state terms social equity applicants. At the moment, New York's only legal marijuana growers are 10 companies that supply medical weed to roughly 125,000 registered patients. Gandelman estimates about 200 small-scale hemp farmers could meet the new licensing requirements, which include having grown hemp for at least 2 of the last 4 years. So I think this is super interesting. Interesting intersection of hemp and marijuana. And I don't know, I think, let's be honest, that a lot of people got into growing CBD hemp in the first place because they thought it was like practice for growing marijuana, or that's what they wanted to grow in the first place. And yeah, look what New York's doing. Pretty fascinating. So anyway, that's the big news nugget hemp-wise today, apart from the devastating news coming out of Eastern Europe and Ukraine. So, okay. All right, I've done a lot of talking today, so let's change that. Let's get into my first interview with Tim Almond, and then we'll hear from James Gaspard, and then finally from Aaron DeLong. Tim Almond from Heartland Industries. Welcome to the Lancaster Farming Industrial Hemp Podcast. How are you doing today, Tim?
I'm good, Eric. Thank you for having me on.
Yeah. So you are the founder and the chairman of Heartland Industries. I first heard of your company because I saw, a press release from the USDA that your company was awarded a grant for $360,000, one of 19 companies that were given grants under the Conservation Innovation Grant Program. Mm-hmm. So how did you get the government to give you the better part of $500,000?
Yeah, it's been an exciting journey so far. My business partner, Jesse, and I started this about 18 months back. And we, funny enough, we filed for the grant back, I want to say last January, and really didn't expect much of it, to be totally honest. A lot of our daily operations is trying to educate people on the soil health benefits of industrial hemp as a rotational crop, mm-hmm. as well as the potential for carbon sequestration in soil throughout those processes, right. By using regenerative agricultural practices. And then, the day we got the award, it was kind of a shock. And it was really exciting. And I actually think it's going to be one of the most sophisticated and largest studies into industrial hemp with regards to soil health and carbon sequestration.
That's awesome.
And being able to be on a national stage with the USDA is a blessing.
Right. It's quite a spotlight that they're shining on you guys. Mm-hmm. And you were the only project that had anything to do with hemp. There were 18 other companies that had nothing to do with hemp. So Tell me about the project. I understand it's called Hemp4Soil.
Yeah.
And you're working with farmers across the country. So tell me about it.
Yeah, so it's named Hemp4Soil, and the idea behind it is we're working with farmers. I think it's about 10 states right now, and it's small plots, 5 to 10 acres. It's a 3-year program where we're doing hemp, a traditional crop like corn or soy, and then hemp again the following year, and running soil tests and carbon tests to see what the change is and to better explore what might actually be possible using hemp as a rotation as well. We are looking at regenerative agricultural practices. So I'll put an asterisk next to that, not no-till necessarily. Okay. Things like vertical tilling, so 2-3 inch soil distribution or disruption, and trying to see how keeping the roots intact in the soil affects that over time.
Okay. Yeah. And so how did you find the farmers that you're going to be working with?
Yeah, so we work with a wonderful community in the industrial hemp space right now. We've got colleagues really across the country that are going above and beyond to join and participate. And it's really in the name of trying to get this crop back into the American farming cycle. Back when it was wrapped into the cannabis bills that really made everything illegal back in the day. It has a real opportunity for growth here. And I think it was back in 1919 or so, the USDA said that industrial hemp was going to be America's crop. Just before it got banned.
Right.
And I think this is really the opportunity for it to come back. What we're really learning how to do is how to replant it, reharvest it. Back in those days, combines didn't exist. All these different pieces of equipment weren't standardized. And, the corn and soy and greater agricultural industry has developed so much and simplified in so many ways these processes. And we really just have to effectively relearn how to do it
Sure.
and then figure out what markets we can actually see value in based on what people still do on a manufacturing level in the States. And that really sends us in the direction on what market we can pursue.
Okay, I have a lot of questions there. Getting back to the farmers that you're working with, they're getting paid for growing hemp, and then will you collect that harvest, or what happens to the crop?
Yeah, so we're paying a flat fee for the land and time. We're paying for passes over the land, and then we're buying the crop at the end of it, and
Okay.
we're covering all of the testing in between. So we're doing soil samples, and we're pairing that actually with a really innovative satellite remote sensing tool that can help try to correlate the soil sampling and the remote sensing,
Oh wow.
so that in the future we can go to a more rapidly scalable sensing system than doing 30 soil sample tests per plot of
Okay.
land.
Right. Right. Yeah, that would get expensive. So the
Mhm.
farmers you're working with, they're going to be making some decent money, like maybe better than what they would get if they had just done soy 3 years in a row here.
Absolutely. Yeah, the idea behind it was, not only this specific plot's not supposed to be a revenue generator for them, but they're taking their time out of their traditional rotation
Hmm.
to help us out, and they needed to be properly compensated. So we go above and beyond with it. Truth of the matter is, it's 200 acres in total, right? So it's not an extreme amount of cash.
Right.
Most of that's coming in on the testing, the analytics, and the back end.
Okay. Now it's to me it sounds like a science experiment. So what do you hope? Like, what's your hypothesis going into it? What do you hope to get from the comparing the soil tests?
Yeah. So the goal in a perfect world is we can validate the thesis that adding hemp into a crop rotation adds value, right? Whether it be soil health increases, whether it be the potential access in the future to carbon marketplace. That is the ultimate goal. And I think the USDA has given us an opportunity to talk about that on a very big stage.
Right.
So that's the ultimate long-term vision behind it. And all of it really comes back to tying together, is there an economic incentive for farmers to switch? And that's really it. So those are the main goals of the
Okay.
study.
All right. And Heartland isn't an agriculture company per se, right? You're what, a biotech company. So you have, other sort of another agenda here, right? Like you want to supply your company or other companies with the raw materials
Mhm.
for manufacturing.
Yeah, so our goal is to develop the markets and the actual use cases where people can utilize these. You're right. We see ourselves as a biotech company. We engineer hemp as an additive to plastic today, and in the future, we see that market expanding as we scale out. But we wanted somewhere simple to start where we could provide a radical value. Um, as we first got into the business, we actually weren't as deep in the farming side as we are today. We were mostly on processing and engineering.
Hmm.
And we realized really quickly that there was no farming infrastructure. We couldn't find these products in the market. And if we could, there wasn't a consistency that was suitable for our clients.
Right.
So, when somebody comes to us and says, we need 100 million pounds, and then they say, I need pound one to look like pound 100 million, it's a reality check.
Yeah. Right.
You have to take a step back and say, wow, this is a massive scale, and we're sitting in an industry where there's no standards in place. There's no SOPs or standard operating procedures that farmers can follow on how to plant, how to harvest, and how to store the product. So we sought out to create it, and we partnered with some of the top seed suppliers here in the United States for industrial hemp, specifically for fiber. And we got our hands dirty. We got into the fields. We better understood what planting equipment works. Right? We tried a grain drill and a broadcaster. And I said it slowly because I always mess it up.
Right. Right.
uh, and we found that traditional corn grain drill is the simplest way to do it.
Right.
Um, and then, it grows for 90 days. You chop it down, and either you bale it up or you silage chop it like you would corn.
Oh, okay.
And that was it. We found a lot of things on the harvesting side that you do not want to do. Anything that spins will wrap hemp.
Sure. Yep.
So we recommend staying as far away from that if you like anything that has bearings.
So like sickle bar mowers, you go in and chop it like that.
Yeah, sickle
Okay.
bar works wonderfully, and then we windrow it in the same way you would with hay.
Hmm.
Almost all of the exact same equipment.
Sure.
Mhm.
And then as you said you can chop it like silage too, because I guess if you're making plastic out of it, you don't need super long fibers, right?
Yeah, so we do a cloth chopper. We have special blades in there, and we just go through and chop it to 2 inch,
Wow.
and then you put it in a wagon and you ship it to storage.
So once you harvest it and it's like after storage on the way to, being made into something, can you walk us through that? Like how do you get from, cut hemp into like a bio resin or whatever you call it?
Yeah, so I'll give you some background on the marketplace and kind of how we got to the silage part of our business.
Okay.
When we first started, we were very exploratory. We were looking around to see what was actually possible, but most importantly, what was actually possible here in America. We looked at textiles. I think textiles is fascinating, but we realized really fast that 97% is done overseas.
Hmm.
And, we asked ourselves, when was the last time did we buy a t-shirt from America? It's an unfortunate truth, but Southeast Asia has a stronghold of that marketplace. So we said, let's table that for now, and look at something that's made here in America that we can really dive into. The next one we took a deep look at was building materials,
Hmm.
of which I think will be in 5 years the biggest marketplace for industrial hemp. And we saw today bottlenecks.
You mean hempcrete and insulation, that sort of thing? Is that what you mean for building materials?
I don't necessarily think hempcrete will be the formula.
Okay.
From what I've learned, hempcrete is a very specific mixture of hemp and limestone.
Hmm.
It's a non-structural format with a certain size. I believe that in the future it will be used as an additive in concrete, right?
Okay.
So hemp might be 20 or 30% by weight of the concrete, rather than specifically, a 2-to-1 ratio of hemp to lime.
Hmm.
And in that scenario, it kind of takes the same thesis that we have today with hemp as an additive, where you keep your same existing infrastructure, you keep your same processes, you just swap out some of the additives and fillers.
Right. You flow it
Yeah.
in little by little to create the market. Okay.
Absolutely.
Cool.
So I think that's where that'll be. And as we deep dove into building materials, we got really excited about it. It is huge.
Yeah.
And it's very localized. So you see it everywhere. Today, there are legislative programs. So ASTM building standards, county to county approvals.
Right.
There are small roadblocks to a large scale production. And we saw that, and we asked ourselves, if we can't get to a large scale, which means we can't get price down, how do we compete in that marketplace, where someone might have to pay a premium for the same thing that they could get at Home Depot, right?
Right.
And we said, okay, put that on the back burner. That's coming. That's going to be huge.
Yeah.
Let's get there slowly. And then we looked at bioplastic, right? So bioplastic, the difference between that and traditional plastics is the feedstock. One is a petroleum feed, and the other one is, in many cases, a sugar feed. And sugar being from either sugarcane or corn, right?
Okay. Hmm.
Traditionally. We looked at that and we called all the major chemical providers and we said, are you guys interested in hemp-based plastics as a feedstock? And really, we got every single door shut on us. There wasn't a lot of interest in bioplastic. And when we first started asking, we really didn't know much about the plastic industry. We were just throwing darts at the wall to see what
Sure.
stuck.
Yeah.
Um, but we knew the trend lines. We know where buying power was going. We see how the younger generation behaves. Um, so we ended up calling back the CEOs of one of the largest plastic distributors, and we said, Mark, why don't you guys have any interest in this? And he goes, Tim and Jesse, you guys are trying to disrupt a 100-year-old marketplace as a seed company, right? Like a very early stage business. He's like, it's not going to work. You're going to fail. And he said something that resonated with us so deeply. He said, if you can find a way to align with these manufacturers, these chemical producers, you will have a home in the plastic industry forever. So we changed, call it 10 words on our website, from we make hemp-based plastics to we use hemp as an additive to make your existing plastic stronger, lighter, cheaper, and more sustainable. And in that moment, our entire business model shifted.
Wow.
And we started product development, 7 of the 10 big chemical guys. I mean, you name it, we are either in the accounts or talking to people and starting the product development process.
Wow.
And we really found, once we got inside of the industry, that most plastic is already filled with an additive. So in many cases, talc, calcium, fiberglass, probably familiar with, all these different minerals are really the core components of plastic. And we found that if you swap out those additives from mined goods to a hemp-based good, you see an increase in strength, you see a significant reduction in weight, and you can keep the cost right around parity or less. And then you can start to talk about the sustainability opportunity behind it. And that was really the light moment for us, where we found out, okay, this is actually feasible. People could do this and it could work. So that's what we just doubled down on.
So are you, at this point, you're not actually replacing the petroleum, you're just adding hemp into it?
Yeah. So holistically, you can reduce the plastic use a little bit because there's a new material being filled. You can start that process of the sustainability journey without just ripping out the entire program. And really, we found it is the only way. Quite frankly, there was no other path to do it.
Right.
And I think the world started to realize that. Because when we talk to clients, you look at the Fortune 100, for example, every single one of them has a sustainability mandate that their CEOs have signed, that's coming from investors, it's coming from customers, it's coming from employees. And it might not be, net zero by 2050, but it's a 2030 goal. It's a 2025 goal. It's carbon footprint reduction, plastic use reduction, maybe just recycled products or bio-based to a certain percent. Somewhere along the lines, people said, we want to change something.
Yeah. Okay. Now, does using, bio-based polymers or whatever in your plastic, does that help it become more recyclable? Because I know that at this point, like, only 9% of the world's plastic has ever been recycled, and like the whole recycling thing is essentially a scam as far as consumers go. So does this help alleviate that issue at all, or are we still left with plastic that we still just have to throw in the ocean? Because that's what we do with plastic now, right? We just chuck it in the ocean.
It's an interesting question. From a recyclability standpoint, in many ways, it's consumer behavior. It's not the material itself. You can recycle a lot of plastic. And from an industry standpoint, industry resin, a lot of it is recycled. Yeah. And that's what people don't realize. I would say 90% of recycled plastic is industry recycling. Most of the PCR just goes straight into the trash, like you mentioned. Yeah. From a recyclability standpoint, on mechanical processing, it's just fine. It doesn't change anything. as long as people get it there, right?
Right,
You can't
right.
change that just by changing the material. Um, but if it biodegrades today, hemp will biodegrade with it.
Hmm.
If it doesn't biodegrade today, hemp won't biodegrade with it.
Oh, I see. Okay.
Just on like a practicality level.
Right. You talked about looking at textiles, and we're not there yet. You're probably not going to get into that. You're thinking building materials is coming, but the plastic stuff is here. You can do that. What other industries do you think you can help supply, or have you just chosen the lane? You're just getting into plastics.
Yeah. So this was our go-to-market strategy. We realized that we had to be focused beyond reasonable doubt on one specific customer and just add as much value as we could. I can tell you behind the scenes, today's one-liner is hemp fibers engineered for plastic. Tomorrow's one-liner will be hemp fibers engineered for everything.
Nice.
And the idea behind it is our thesis, our business model is using hemp as an additive. We chose plastic to start because that is huge opportunity. We are approved for asphalt, so rubber. We're approved for rubber. Concrete will come. Hempcrete really is just hemp as an additive to concrete, anyways. That will come with time. Rubber, I don't know if I mentioned that. Rubber is a wonderful use case, whether it's natural or synthetic. Wood and paper, right?
Yep.
Either
Yeah.
a pulp molded or everything from an OCB board, right? Those are applications where using 10, 20, 30% hemp can actually increase the longevity of the material and actually increase the recyclability too. And I'll give you a great example with cardboard. Cardboard recycling is becoming very huge right now because of cardboard shortages. And that happened throughout this COVID, where all the materials really hit a shortage, but cardboard especially. And people are trying to figure out how to recycle it better. And it's a tough material to recycle because the fibers, the wood fibers, just don't reprocess very well.
Right.
And we've found that using an additive like hemp at a small percentage increases that recyclability.
Wow.
Just because the hemp fibers recycle better than the wood fibers do.
Okay. Like 5%, 10%, like how small?
I mean, you could go as high as 100. I realistically see 20 to 30. Just if I had to be truthful about it.
Right.
Realistically, wood costs less than hemp today. So,
yeah.
So in that specific use case, you are cutting into margin, unfortunately. But
yeah, but then if you look at the other costs of cutting down the trees, like you could, make an argument that the long-term cost is much greater to be cutting the trees down.
Yeah. And then that brings up another great question about the cost of carbon coming into the future.
Right.
Companies like Volvo in the EU, they put a price tag on carbon at 116 euros a ton.
Wow.
The country or the entire coalition of countries put a price target on 90 euros a ton. And, America today doesn't do that. They don't mandate it. It's a very voluntary marketplace, but there is a very clear future of where that's going. Right. The USDA has already doubled down on it. These pieces are coming. I'm actually really excited about our USDA grant because we can help add the data points for people to make an educated decision on if they want to pursue that or not.
Yeah. Just last week, I was talking to Ben Dobson at Hudson Hemp. Are you familiar with that company in New York?
I'm not, no.
Hudson Carbon is actually one of their businesses. And he's researching, how much carbon is sequestered in the soil. So you guys should get together. It sounds like
I should, yeah. That would be awesome. We actually got the first round of data in from last year's a couple months back. And let me just say it's promising. And the idea behind it is it has to be wrapped in practicality, right? Like my goal is to not make people change out all their infrastructure. If you have to go buy new tractors, it's tough, right? Going full no-till is very tough, but if there's the right economic incentive,
sure,
doing a low till with a vertical tiller or just 2 to 3 inch topsoil disruption, you can see, think of it like the 80-20 rule. You can get 80% of it done, but that last 20% that you're trying to squeeze out, it's much more difficult. So if we focused on that first 80, we could do a lot.
So what's your vision for the United States, like 15 years from now, like as far as manufacturing and how it intersects with agriculture?
Yeah, I think a lot of the base of manufacturing will be agricultural based products. And the truth is, specifically with the scope and scale of agricultural farming, it costs less. You can do it and you can centralize it, and hemp will grow almost anywhere.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
And then you hear these stories about the Midwest where there's like 50 years of topsoil left, like 50 seasons. But then here's a crop that, if you do it right, could help you build up your soil. So we could sort of kill a lot of birds with this one stone here.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's fascinating. We're actually working on a program right now that we're applying for the X Prize with. Yeah. And the program's called Engineering Earth. And the premise behind it is that the Amazon is known to the world as the lungs of the earth.
Yeah, yeah.
But what people don't realize is that farmland on planet Earth is 4 times bigger by acreage than the Amazon. And 25% of biodiversity lives in soil. So you could make a claim that if the Amazon's the lungs of the earth, farmland is the skin, and it might be even more important. And the process or the concept is if you can engineer Earth properly, it will do exactly what we need it to do.
Yeah, right. And like we farm 60% of the land mass. So like there's a big opportunity there.
Yeah.
And I've also described this vision of the future as like recreating a new lungs of the world. Like I look at, the middle of America, like what I sort of see as the Louisiana Purchase. Like that whole thing could be just vast stands of hemp that we could grow. Why couldn't we stockpile it at this point and then just learn how to use it for everything?
Mm-hmm. And it's exciting too, because the practices behind the engineering earth idea, it's not just hemp. You could be a corn and soy farmer, and it's just, it's running tractor treads instead of tires, right? It's using vertical tilling instead of a plow. It's planting a cover crop at the end of the year to maintain soil health through the winter. It's really just those little pieces that has significant impact. But if there's no incentive, if there's no dollar sign behind the change, it's very rare that you'll see mass adoption. We happen to live in a very unique moment where the cost of fertilizer is up 500%. That's weird, right? Grain contracts around the country are becoming far and few. It's very tough to keep up with the traditional practices in I don't even want to say a post-COVID world, but in the middle of a COVID world where so much has changed so rapidly. Something that had been in place for 50 years, you never had to question.
Right.
Now you have to ask yourself, can I rely on this?
Yeah, these are strange times. And like you never heard anybody mention supply chains before, but now like you hear about supply chains all the time, and people are starting to realize like, oh, maybe global supply chains aren't that smart. Maybe we need local supply chains.
Yeah.
So, yeah. So why is what you're doing important to you?
I'm a problem solver. So actually, that's where I get it. My business partner much more resonates on the sustainability side, but I love to solve problems, and I see this challenge as one of the funnest ones of our generation. And we're sitting at an epicenter where we can do great impact and great work, and make more people money. And at the end of the day, isn't that what life's about to some degree?
I guess you could argue that, yeah.
There's obviously much more, but if you got to work 10 hours a day, might as well love what you're doing.
Yeah, right. Is there anything else you would want listeners to know about Heartland?
Yeah, I think that really covers it. Really, at the end of the day, Heartland wants to become one of the most sustainable businesses on earth. And we do that by empowering our clients to become more sustainable. And we're looking to educate as many people who want to listen and want to take a look at, what else might be out there in this world. And I think we're living in a time where those conversations are ready to be had, to be honest.
All right, Tim Almond from Heartland Industries. Thank you so much for your time today. It's been a pleasure talking to you.
Thank you for having me, Eric.
All right, so that's Tim Almond from Heartland Industries in Detroit, Michigan. I will put a link to their website on the show page for this episode. All right, coming up, I'm continuing my journey of discovery into things that sequester carbon, and one of the hot topics in that arena is biochar. And I know a little bit about it, but I want to know more about it. James Gaspard from Biochar Now. Welcome to the Lancaster Farming Industrial Hemp Podcast. How are you doing today?
Doing great, and thank you for having me, Eric.
Absolutely. So I'm curious about biochar. What is it? Let's just start there. Walk me through what this thing is.
Yeah, it's a fair-haired child lately because of the carbon sequestration angle. We at Biochar Now have been doing this for over 12 years, but it's like we persevered, and now the world is catching on to the benefits of biochar, especially as carbon increases in our atmosphere. Mm-hmm. But biochar, pretty simply, is just organic matter that's pyrolyzed, which is a chemical reaction, and it converts it into pure, long-lasting carbon that has certain properties as a general rule.
Okay. And so is it like you're sort of heating it up and like burning it, but you're doing it in an anaerobic environment, so there's no oxygen?
Yeah, I mean, I can speak to our technology. Ours is different than a lot of others, but what we do is we literally shred organic or wood waste and put it in a kiln. We create a vacuum, and then we get the wood. It starts a chemical reaction. Once it's lit, we light it, create a vacuum, it starts a chemical reaction, and the wood itself will generate the energy for the reaction, but the temperature will go to multiple times the temperature of fire. So it's more of a chemical reaction, and it burns off everything within the cellular structure of the wood. It breaks all that down, all the tars and lignins and water and everything, and it turns the cellular structure into a pure carbon matrix, mm-hmm. which then has different unique properties to that matrix. Like our carbons, according to the USDA ARS labs, is the only carbon they found that has both cation and anion exchange properties in the carbon. So what that means at the molecular level, we can bind toxins, we can bind salts, we can bind nutrients, which is important in the ag world, but also, we're not a one-way trip. Like a plant root can come down and interact with the carbon through the cation exchange property, and the carbon will release the nutrients to the plant. But so we bind up everything. We're using Superfund sites to bind up toxins. We're used frac water spills to bind up the salty water down in Texas that comes with the frac water, the chemicals. But in the ag world, we bind up all the nutrients and fertilizers so it doesn't wash out of the root zone. And that's what leads to the greatly increased yields with the biochar, because we're literally just keeping the nutrients where they belong and not letting them wash out.
Okay. And so what farmers would buy a big, a couple of square yards of this stuff and mix it into their soil, or how would you use it?
Yes, that's it. In fact, with our company, we have 4 different size fractions. So basically, depending on what equipment the farmer already has, from a manure spreader to an air seeder to a PTO fertilizer spreader, even the center pivot, we've got carbons that can be delivered through any of the equipment. And with our carbon, you're only targeting the increase to put about 2% by volume in the root zone. And that's enough to bind up the nutrients. So if you Google biochar, you'll see there's like 1 million hits, man. And, there's a lot of well, and I'm being polite when I say there's a lot of snake oil out there. And then some of the studies even use some of this poor quality carbon. So they'll say you need 20 tons an acre. No, you don't. No, you don't. If it's a high quality, it's less than a ton an acre.
Okay.
So I don't want your listeners to be afraid that, my God, we got to cover our land in carbon. That's not the way it works. With our carbon, it's not, like I say, it's only 2% by volume. And if you direct it to where it needs to be, like with, let's say you go through an air seeder with the seed, I mean, you can get by in minuscule amounts over an acre.
Okay. I'm trying to, it sort of reminds me of, like, I guess, the charcoal that they used to make for the iron industry. So I'm in Pennsylvania, and it's a historical like iron industry area.
Yeah,
and
it's a lot of similarities, except we're like that charcoal on steroids. So to give you an idea, our product, that charcoal you're talking about, probably had a BTU value of 6,000-7,000. Ours has a BTU value of over 15.
Holy cow! Okay.
So it's more of a purity. It's just like carrying it to that next level and imparting properties on it that it didn't have, the basic stuff. Because when you're in a vacuum environment for that long, that's what imparts upon the, these properties. What's important to know, also, your listeners will probably think, oh, well, the carbon in my water filter is the same stuff. No, that's an activated carbon that filters. We bind. A good biochar will bind the molecules, and that's why we can release them, because it's bound with these molecular, forces, or whatever you want to call it, electrical charges, positive and negative.
Okay.
And then when the plant root comes down, that's how nature feeds, is the cation exchange. So it interacts with the carbon that way, where if you had like activated carbon in your soil, it's just a dumb filter and it wouldn't release anything.
Okay. There's a lot of talk out there that, hemp is a good sort of input to make biochar. Is there truth there?
There's a lot, especially I'm in Colorado. They even put our kilns in statute out here as a way to dispose of waste, illegal waste, get rid of the marijuana waste. And my head wants to explode on some of this stuff, because what people don't understand, and it's just a lack of knowledge, I guess, some hemp strains are high in silica. If you pyrolyze silica, it turns into silicosis, which is like worse than asbestos and asbestosis. So you literally, if you are pyrolyzing the wrong strain of hemp, you're literally going to give yourself lung cancer and anybody that runs into this product. So the industry needs to understand, it needs to be better educated. Now, I mean, I give speeches at hemp conferences and stuff, and yes, you can turn hemp into carbon. You just have to be careful and test the hemp you're using to make sure it's not loaded with silica. And, as you were, I mean, they got, God knows the number of strains are out there. And it's, this is just something that's been picked up on very recently. I guess there was one strain that was really high in silica. Plus, if you're planting it in an area that's high in silica in the soil, the plant will take it up. So it can make a great carbon. You just have to be careful with the feedstock. Make sure you're not creating an additional problem.
Okay, that's good to know. You were using the word paralyze? Is that what you're saying?
Paralysis.
Paralysis.
It's basically the easiest way to explain paralysis is it's a chemical reaction, but if you think about it, it's like combustion without oxygen.
Okay.
So if our kilns were glass kilns while it's undergoing paralysis, it would be like the burning bush in the Bible. It would just be completely engulfed in flame, but nothing getting reduced, because you're basically cracking all the tars and lignins and water molecules out of the cellular structure of the wood, and burning that off, pulling that off, and combusting those toxins.
Yeah.
So it's a unique way to get rid of stuff. You can go to extremely high temperatures and break down. We're even approved. I don't make hemp carbon or our carbon for the ag world out of railroad ties or treated wood, but the government has approved us to dispose of those items because our paralysis because we keep it at temperature for so long, we actually break down all those long chain molecules that are toxins in that wood.
Yeah.
So that's what pyrolysis does. It rips apart stuff that way, and then we pull it off and get rid of it in an emission control system.
Okay. Can you describe the facility? What do these kilns look like? How big is the?
Look like big steels sitting out there. They're big pots, 7.5 foot across. They hold 11 cubic yards of material, each one of them, shredded material. And our emission control system is extremely clean, so we can have hundreds of these on site operating at a single time. And then, then we process it in an automated processing line we have, and goes into bags and separates out sizes. But we putting these sites all around the country.
Okay.
In fact, in your part of the world, I believe you're in Pennsylvania. We're putting a site right now in Western Virginia.
Okay.
Putting sites up in Connecticut and New Jersey and all around. In fact, I'm looking to put a site in Scranton area.
Oh, there. Okay.
So we're going all over the country. So, here in the next year or two, hopefully you won't have to go very far, to find one of our sites.
Right. And you're based in Berthoud, Colorado?
Yes, that's where our current Colorado site is. The company is based in Loveland, but Berthoud, Colorado, right off the interstate. So anybody's driving up I-25, just look to your left at milepost 249. You'll see beautiful mountain view, but you'll see our kilns before you see the mountains.
Okay, all right. What else should people know about Biochar Now?
Biochar Now, we've been at it for a lot of years. We've seen a bunch of people come and go in this industry. We've been at it for 12 years now. We work with major corporations. We make a unique carbon that has unique properties, and we work with as a general rule, we work with the large, like in the landscaping world, we work with all the large landscaping companies, national landscaping companies.
Okay.
We provide their product for that. I do speak at most of the hemp conferences around the country. I'll be at NOCO on several panels this year.
Okay.
We spoke at the Southern Hemp Conference. I just got back from Oklahoma, speaking at the Oklahoma Hemp Summit last week. But our product has been proven in the field to triple yields for hemp farmers. And
wow.
We also hold water, almost 6 times our weight in water. So even though the hemp plant doesn't need that much water, and then if we're holding it, it really makes the hemp field stingy on water.
Okay.
With our carbon in the ground. No, that's where we're at. We work a lot with major hemp farmers as well, especially in the West where water is precious.
Sure.
And then, yeah.
So there's a lot of talk of, carbon markets, sort of they're coming down the pike, right? How do you see your business fitting into this sort of new world of, carbon credits and carbon markets?
We do create carbon credits with everything we produce. I've been through the process enough to understand that for every ton of carbon we produce, we create 2.9 carbon dioxide removal equivalent credits. It's actually a sort of a misnomer in the carbon credit world. You're actually not trading carbon credits, you're trading carbon dioxide removal equivalent credits.
Okay.
But it's easy to say carbon credits.
Sure.
But, so for every ton we produce, we sequester enough carbon that it basically counts for 3 tons of carbon dioxide removal. And we've been approached by a lot of major corporations because the government has measured our carbon to have a 17,000 year half-life in the soil. So a lot of these other carbons may not last. I think the bogey on most of these trading platforms is like 100 years. And some of the carbons can't even last that long. But they're made in an auction environment. We're made in a vacuum. If you make a carbon in an auction environment, it degrades a lot faster once you use it in the environment.
Okay.
So no, it's the thing. I mean, we are, in fact, right after I get off this podcast, I've actually got a call with a major trading platform. So we're constantly in discussions with the people. They're calling us for about the credits that we generate.
Okay. Well, I appreciate the time that you've given us here today, and I'll let you get back to your business there.
I appreciate it, and it's a great thing you're doing. The hemp industry is, especially on the industrial side, is going to be massive. I mean, and we're like the Levi's. We're selling the picks and shovels instead of getting into the business of what the hemp guys are doing. But we can add to their benefit.
Yeah.
We're a one and done application. But I see the whole landscape in my position, and I can tell you it's amazing what's coming down the pike. Plus, with the regenerative ag focus, any crops, we're going into all the crops, broad-based ag, the specialty crops, the berries, the orchards, barley, wheat, corn. Biochar is going to play an important role as all this goes, and there's plenty of federal funding being thrown at these projects as well. So if any of your customers, want to apply the product to their fields, and if it's large enough application worth paperwork, we actually can tune them into areas where they can get reimbursed from government funds.
Okay, and people can learn more at biocharnow.com.
Biocharnow.com. Just click on the info requested box and we'll get in touch with them.
All right. One more thing. So biochar is not really like a new technology. There's some evidence that indigenous cultures in the Amazon were using it.
Yeah, it's over 5,000 years old.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's
the
pretty
big
neat.
problem has been, which we solved in our own way, with our own technology. We've got like 16 patents. They rediscovered biochar decades ago. The problem is, how do you create it at scale? Because of the great need for it. And that's what's been the race. Because, they were making it 5,000 years ago in the Amazon. But then when the white man went up the river, he carried with him a bunch of diseases, and all that knowledge was lost.
Gone. I know. Very sad.
And so what's been the big issue is, how do you recreate what they did? Because they made stuff that's still in the soil working 5,000 years later. So that's what the big race has been. And we went down one path, and we spent $30 million going down our path. Our competitors went down another path. They spent over $1 billion. So there's plenty of money being thrown at this. Luckily, we've been able to recreate the high quality, and mechanize it and computerized it. But I imagine at the end of the day, the chemical reactions is exactly what those natives were doing 5,000 years ago in dirt trenches.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, they just didn't hit the same level of production we did, and might have been a small bit of that actually turned into the high quality carbon, and the rest went to ash or poor quality carbon.
Okay.
But yeah, no, that's what's old is new again. Look, there's nothing new in this world. It's just being rediscovered.
Right.
I'm a licensed attorney, and first thing they told us the first day of law school is they're not going to teach us anything new. They're just going to teach us what the words meant and where we can go steal the documents off of somebody else, because there's nothing new. Same kind of thing here.
All right. Well, I appreciate the work you're doing, and it's been great talking to you.
Thank you. You have a good one.
All right. How about that? Biochar. So anyway, looking at the clock here, it's sort of a long show, and I really appreciate you sticking with me. And we've got one more conversation to get to today. Okay, so as you know, I am from Pennsylvania. I live in Pennsylvania. I live in southeastern Pennsylvania. I live in northern Chester County, Pennsylvania. And this is a special place, not just because I grew up here and live here. I will add that I've lived other places around the country, New England, Colorado. I've traveled extensively. I've traveled internationally, so I have some perspective on things. But I did choose to move back home. Many years ago now, my wife and I have chosen to raise our family here. It's a very special place, not just because of all of those, connections for me, but I look at it like it's a really special place farming-wise. There's a whole network of small farms, small businesses, and the people who are making it happen here. Just, it's fascinating. So I want to start to tell their stories. And so these stories aren't necessarily hemp related, but they're farming related. And so I assume, dear listener, that you will be receptive to these stories and appreciate it and learn something from it. So anyway, my first attempt here to tell local stories is this conversation with Aaron DeLong, local farmer, local business person. He's an agriculture educator with PASA Sustainable Ag. And he's embarking on a really special opportunity in the next few weeks, and he's going to share that knowledge with us. But just a heads up, the sound quality might be a little wacky because we set the mobile rig up in the back room at their market, and there's some refrigeration sounds, and there's also the sound of work being done out on the road. They're putting in a traffic light. Long story. We won't get into that now. Anyway, Aaron DeLong, welcome to the Lancaster Farming Industrial Hemp Podcast. How are you doing?
I'm good. How are you, Eric?
Doing all right. So this is sort of a local interview. We're right down the road from where I normally record our podcast. And Aaron, you are the husband of our local farmer. My wife and I belong to a CSA called Knee-High Farm. And your wife, Emma, runs that. And you have been involved in agriculture in many ways too. You work with PASA. Well, how about I let you do the introduction? Could you introduce yourself?
Sure. Well, you're doing fine. My wife Emma is the owner-operator of Knee-High Farm, which is in its 10th season now this year. And that's right across the road from where we're speaking. We're sitting right now in Emma and my hyper-local grocery market, Red Dog Market, which is the business we launched last year. My background in agriculture started when I was 14. I started working on a flower and vegetable farm in Pocopson, Pennsylvania. And then eventually I was working over in Westtown for Pete Flynn for most of my teens and early 20s.
And that's southeastern Pennsylvania.
It's Chester County. It's about 40 minutes from here. And learned a lot there. Got some of the inspiration that gave rise to Red Dog Market today. For the last 6 years, I've been working for PASA Sustainable Agriculture, basically trying to help farmers, sustainable farmers, regenerative agriculture farmers, learn from one another and do better in terms of creating healthy food, profitable farms, and a healthy environment. So that work has been very rewarding, and now I'm kind of entering a new phase.
Yeah, well, let's talk about that new phase. You're about to travel to Europe, next week? What is this trip about?
So yeah, actually through PASA, I got connected with this program called Nuffield International Farming Scholars. And it's essentially a kind of a fellowship program for professionals in the agricultural industry, particularly farmers, but there are technical service providers involved as well. And the idea is that you propose a research question, and then you get funded to travel internationally, connecting with previous Nuffield scholars and investigating your research question from a global perspective. So it's taking you outside your backyard and putting you in different parts of the world where the ag system might look very different, but also be very informative towards the models back home.
Cool. So where are you going?
Well, I'm actually going to the initial conference that kind of kicks off my research period, and this is in England. The United Kingdom and Australia are the two founding countries for the Nuffield program, which is over 50 years old. The United States is a more recent participant in this network. So I'll go to England and I'll meet with the other 2021 scholars. We got postponed for a year because of the pandemic. And we'll network with one another and we'll get introduced to sort of the Nuffield program. And then I'll do some independent travel in the United Kingdom for a couple weeks, visiting farms and investigating my research topic, which is about shortening supply chains to create resilient local food systems, which plays into, I think there are a lot of reasons to investigate that, and one is personal for our own market, looking at how these kind of models have succeeded in other places, but also from a wider community and societal perspective. I think the shorter our supply chains, the more local our food systems, the healthier our communities and are going to be overall.
Yeah. As I have been talking to people in the hemp space for a few years now, it all comes back to local supply chains in hemp. You need to have short supply chains. So I think the work you're doing and what you're going to discover would be of interest to people in the hemp space.
Yeah.
So I wonder if you could, I don't know, sort of what are you hoping to get out of this? Like what, when it's all over, what do you hope to have learned?
Well, I think one of the I'd love to know what I don't know. Again, to me, there are two aspects. There's a personal aspect, which is maybe a little selfish, but I think we always gotta be acting on both the personal and also the social levels. And from the personal level, I hope that it will help Emma and me create a place with Red Dog Market where local farmers and other makers can find a good market for their products, that will also help sustain our farm operation and family. And then from the wider perspective, what I'm hoping to learn, I think I have a very strong intuitive feeling that building local food systems and shortened supply chains is a good thing. And I think it's good from an ecological perspective. I think it's good from an economic perspective. I think strong local economies make strong national economies, whereas I think if we just focus on biggest scale possible, it doesn't necessarily trickle down to communities. And I also think that it's that strong local food systems make strong communities. That's something I've seen with Red Dog is just commerce can be such a wonderful place for social interaction and can really help bring communities together. And I think local businesses can really do that in a way that large box stores can't. Can be very empowering. But I think a lot of this feeling is anecdotal for me and intuitive and experiential. I'd love to come out of Nuffield through this sort of formal research project with a bit more ammunition for policymakers about the real quantifiable numbers that can speak to the power of local food systems, local economic systems, shortened supply chains that will counter some of the arguments around economies of scale in terms of, well, we were just, before we were recording, we were talking about dairy and the notion that a 10,000 cow organic dairy in Texas or New Mexico, where they're pumping water from aquifers to run these farms and then shipping milk to the Northeast, and that milk is somehow cheaper than the milk that's being made in Pennsylvania or New York State, is outlandish to me. And I think it only appears that way because of the way the system's set up and the subsidies run. So I'd love to have a little more ammunition to talk to policymakers and just the general public with real numbers about the value of food that's produced in your backyard in a very real sense, beyond just the feel-good notions that I think a lot of us have around local food.
So you go to England, you have sort of the kickoff event conference with the other scholars.
Yes.
And then what happens?
Yeah, so what will happen for me after that is I'll have a couple weeks in England that I'm able to take out of my life before I have to be back in the state because we got seeds in the greenhouse. And I'll be visiting with people who are formerly Nuffield scholars. The scholar database right now is in the thousands. And part of the beauty of this program, when I worked with PASA, one of the things I love about PASA Sustainable Agriculture, I work very, very part-time with them now, sustaining a couple projects. But the whole PASA model and the way it arose was giving farmers a forum and a place to talk to one another, and it's peer-to-peer information exchange, which is different than a model such as extension, which is more about disseminating research that is happening at land-grant universities to farmers. Mm-hmm. That's very important, and it's also very important that professionals be able to network with one another and share their own practical experience with one another. So I'll be visiting with these Nuffield farming scholars in England that have done research in the past that are relevant to the topic I'm investigating. And basically just learning from them. What does your farm shop look like? Or what does regenerative agriculture look like to you? And how do you communicate that to the consumer? What is local with a supply chain, and how do you communicate with a consumer, and how do you interact with your land base to create food and to get it to local markets? So I don't know, Eric, honestly, some of this is, I've talked to former scholars, and a lot of them say, yeah, you write your research topic and then you start doing your travel and it shifts, it changes, and you discover something you didn't totally expect, and you have to be open to following that. And you and I have both traveled a good bit, and I think that's one of the wonders and wonderful aspects of travel is some of the things you end up learning, some of the best wisdom you end up gleaning can be quite unsuspected and come from directions you didn't predict.
Absolutely, yeah. Would you be willing to check in with us on the podcast, like from England, while you're traveling around there? We can sort of hear, firsthand what you're doing.
Oh yeah, that'd be great. I'd love to continue the conversation. I think, one of the real goals of the Nuffield program and PASA is to be sharing what we're learning, and also just continuing the conversation. It's so important that that we be talking to one another and connecting with one another about our food system and our farms and how we're doing things. And that's going to be the best way for us to create something that is truly local and sustainable. And it's really about community.
Awesome. Well, Aaron DeLong, thank you for your time today. It's great to sort of sit here in the kitchen of the Red Dog Market.
We're in the back room. Yeah.
Between the refrigerator sounds and the work that they're doing out on the street.
Yeah.
But I think we did good. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Eric. Talk to you soon.
All right, so there you go. Aaron DeLong about to embark on his own journey of discovery. And I'm excited that he's going to come back on the show and, share what he's learned with us. So anyway, thank you for listening to today's show. And just a heads up, this weekend I am traveling to Denver, Colorado. I have been invited to attend the National Farmers Union Convention. The National Farmers Union has selected me as their 2022 recipient of the Milton Hakel Award for Excellence in Agricultural Communications. Wow, that is quite an honor. So I'm going out to Denver to meet with the National Farmers Union, attend their conference, and receive an award, and I'll say a few words. And I'm excited about this because, well, for many reasons, but I get to talk about hemp with a whole new audience, and I also get to talk about Lancaster Farming Newspaper with a whole new audience. So this is great, and I appreciate this recognition. And if any listeners out there in the Denver area hear this and want to get in touch, you want to make some suggestions for what I should check out in Denver, hemp-wise or otherwise, shoot me an email. Send it to podcast@lancasterfarming.com. And I think next week's show is actually going to be about my trip to Denver. So we'll see what happens. But anyway, thanks again for listening to today's show. My name is Eric Herlock. I am the digital editor at Lancaster Farming Newspaper, the greatest agricultural newspaper in the world. So anyway, to recap, praying for peace. My heart goes out to the people of Ukraine, the people of Eastern Europe, the people of the world, praying for peace. And I hope you will join me in that. Until next time, I will see you in the newspaper. This episode of the Lancaster Farming Industrial Hemp Podcast is copyright 2022 by Lancaster Farming Newspaper, which is part of the Steinman Communications family. Today's show was written and recorded, edited, and produced by yours truly, Eric Herlock. Any music you hear throughout the show is courtesy of Tin Bird Shadow.
Industrial hemp.